military students, that's what they're going through when they're coming back to the college setting is they don't know where they are, they haven't done this for 10, maybe 5 years, or it's overwhelming. It's they feel like they don't belong in that setting. So it's like I'm here not necessarily as a social worker, but in the position that I'm in, I'm able to use my social work skills to help these students like readjust into the civilian setting.
So if you don't have that something foundation, you could say, right? So it doesn't have to be, I guess, family, but friendship, a community, someone who's going to help you. And it's really challenging to do this on your own because higher education is challenging, right?
Even field training at some point gets boring. You know, like you're like, okay, I feel dirty, smelly. Like what the hell am I? Yeah, I'm tired. What am I doing here? You know, but I do think it opens the mind so you can become adaptable to a situation, a hostile situation.
In the military, there's a lot of jobs. Some jobs are transferable to the civilian world, and some jobs you just gotta find a principle that's transferable into the world.
The heart of service, and you guys did a beautiful job of expressing that. And I think too, like connection does a beautiful job in restoring dignity. So I love that you guys receive everybody and remind everybody that they're humanity. Even if they have problems or so many things are going on, you look to the heart of that person and you get to the bottom of it.
Welcome to the Ethic Skill Podcast. We are at Rutgers University, the Veterans Affairs Office, and thank you, Anne and Urzsula. They both work here. They are leaders in this community, and we wanted to understand a little bit more what they do. But before we even do that, we would like to know how they got involved with serving veterans. So I don't know who wants to take that first leap of faith.
You started with
Okay.
that.
Sure. Okay, so I'm Urzsula. I've been working with veterans since 2007, so it's been almost 20 years, I guess. My background is in social work. I grew up on the West Coast. I went to school out there, and then I started working with the foster care population, families and children, and minorities. And when I moved to the East Coast. And then I started, settling down, having my family, and realizing that it's, the social work field is a very difficult and draining field to be involved in. So I had to take some time off when I had my oldest daughter. And then when I went back, I was ready to go back to work. I was living in Staten Island, and I started working. There was a part-time position at the College of Staten Island for a veterans coordinator, and I applied. They were looking for somebody with a social work background. Even though I hadn't worked with military veterans, I had worked with elderly, hospice, foster care, mostly families and children. But I hadn't worked with a military population. But I did have the background, so I applied and I got the position. And this was back in 2007 when the first deployments were coming back from Iraq. The first 3-year deployments, they went out in '04, they were coming back in '07. So the colleges were starting to develop programs to support these individuals on our campuses. So I worked as a veterans coordinator there at the College of Staten Island, and that's kind of like how I started working with military students. And I love working in the college setting and working with the military affiliated population. And almost 20 years later, I'm still here. And along the way, I met Anne. She'll tell you a little bit about how we met and how she started working in this field.
Thank you, Urzsula. And I'm kind of interested because I know you have a military background too.
I enlisted in the Army in 2001 in July, so before 9/11. I remember I enlisted in the Army Reserve initially. I went to college, like most 18-year-olds do. I was 21 at the time, though, and I could make it to a party, but couldn't make it to a class. So I was not doing very well in college. And I was a bartender at a restaurant across the street from the recruiting station. So the recruiters would often come in to have lunch and do their thing. I mean, why not pitch while I'm there? And I was not doing well, flunking out of college, and I thought I needed something. So my dad had served, enlisted in the Navy during Vietnam. My brother was serving in the Army, one of my brothers at the time. So that was it. I was like, I'll do this. I'll be a reservist. It's a weekend a month. It won't be a big deal. And I'll get a little more money for school, and it'll make me more disciplined. I'll be better when I get back. And then 2 days before I finished basic training, 9/11 happened. So, things changed dramatically about what the military was going to look like. I mean, I joined during peacetime. And I remember the drill sergeant going around. We thought they were messing with us and that it was like a war game. So we were turning in our gear, T50. And usually it's a little bit of hazing where they'll be like, oh, it's still dirty, and they hand it back and it's not. But they were just taking it, right? And so we knew something was happening, and they put us in regular POVs, personal vehicles, getting us back to the barracks. And they wheeled out the TV to show us what was happening, and just as like one of the buildings was dropping. And then the drill sergeant went around and like, what is your job in the military? And asking people and then telling them what their job was going to be now. And I was a carpentry masonry specialist. So I just had the biggest bonus, right? I like working with my hands at the time. So, he got to me, he's like, you're going to be making caskets. And then he went to the next person. It was like, a big change. So my reserve unit didn't deploy while I was in it, but in 2003, I volunteered for active duty. So I switched over. I went to Germany for a month, and then my unit was already in Iraq, so I went to Baghdad to meet them in 2003. Got back to Germany, and then less than a year later, I was back in Iraq in Mosul. And then when I got back to Germany, I was done. That was my 3-year. And
Did they offer you like a big sum amount while you were in Iraq?
I don't think it was so much as sum. I do remember that I wasn't interested. I knew I wasn't going to make it a career. I knew it was going to be a short time. And them trying to get me to extend just a little bit. So even though I was a carpenter, mason by training in the military, I ended up doing training NCO, pack clerk of supply for a little bit. And when I was leaving, I was helping other people get orders to go to the next unit because my unit was getting deactivated and reactivated in the States. And yeah, they promised a lot and offered a lot. I was like, I'm good. I'm happy now. Then I worked with, so I went to the College of Staten Island to get my master's degree because I did get out of the military in 2006. Went back to college, finished college at a different school, went to get a master's degree, and Urzsula called me out of the blue because I'd applied to work in the archives because I was getting a master's in history, so I was looking to work in the library. But I guess the HR to ask if anyone who was a veteran had applied.
Right. We were looking at the applications of students that had applied for like college assistant positions, basically, at CSI. And we were trying to see if there were any that had like a military, experience or any kind of background. And Anne Little, back then, that was her name. We came across her resume and gave her a call. And I don't know if we hired anyone else. I feel like we hired a couple students.
Yeah.
You were one of the students that we hired as like a part-time college assistant to help out in our efforts at the campus because I was a part-time position. And then, we had a couple students to work in our office. And she was one of them.
Mm-hmm.
So
That's awesome.
That's how I started working with veterans. It wasn't something I thought I would end up doing.
That's interesting. I want to pass along my colleagues to ask questions.
So Urzsula, you said you have a background in social work. So how did that prepare you to interact with veterans? What did you take from that experience?
I mean, you can do so much with a social work degree. As you heard, like I worked with, in foster care, and I just being around other social workers and working part-time when I was in college, I looked around and all the people had MSW. So I thought, okay, maybe that's the degree I should go into and it'll prepare me. I enjoy working in this field. I was working with youth, transporting them to appointments, youth that were in foster care. We would take them to appointments, help them, tutor them in their home. And I thought I like working in this, with this population. I like helping people. So then naturally, it helps you be, the schooling helped me become like a better communicator, better listener, develop some of those skills to be able to, interact with people and ask some questions and find out what they're going through and kind of be empathetic to their situation and help them out with different, services and resources. And that's what I think, the military students in the college setting need, that support, and as they're readjusting from their, military experience into the civilian world. So that all those skills that I learned in the social work field, obviously helped me support the students I was working with. I mean, it's such a great degree. You can work with in so many different settings. I worked in a hospital setting, just helping people while they're going through a difficult time, being supportive and, the military students, that's what they're going through when they're coming back to the college setting, is they don't know where they are, they haven't done this for 10, maybe 5 years, or it's overwhelming. It's they feel like they don't belong in that setting. So it's like I'm here not necessarily as a social worker, but in the position that I'm in, I'm able to use my social work skills to help these students like readjust into the civilian setting.
Yeah. So going off of that, and when you got out of the military and went right back into college, how was that transition for you? Like, how was it being in such a disciplinary space where they tell you what to do and they give you the orders versus now creating the orders yourself, but based on a rubric?
Well, I think that's, the military is a total institution, hierarchy, right? You know your place by your rank. You all have the same mission or goal. The military is its own culture, own language, own dress, right? So that, and it is, so choices are made for you and you give up your choices in a sense and some freedoms to serve. And that's the point. And then you get into a higher education situation where it's freedom of choice, right? Choice is encouraged. And I mean, I'm sure you heard this when you were in, like, to be successful in the military, right place, right time, right uniform.
Yes.
That's it. And so many things are done for you where, when I got to my unit in Germany, you gave me a checklist, go here for this, go here for this, go here for this. And they sign when you get there so they know you've done all of it and they assign you someone. And so everything is taken care of for you, right? Housing, where you're going to shop, what your healthcare, you don't have to pick. You don't have to pick a doctor. Everything is provided. And then you get out and you decide what class, right? An advisor asks. And I think the power of choice is what's hardest for folks who get out of the military and then transition into higher education, because there's a lot more, power in you making your own decisions. And that could be a little overwhelming, right? So I think for some students, like for me, I went from being a very bad student to being, on the dean's list, right? Like with a double major and a minor and straight A's, because I was very focused. Because coming back, I'll make that 8 a.m. class. I'll be there. Even if I'm sick, I'll be there. I'll do all my homework. So I think in some ways, like those, service members and veterans tend to be great students, right? Because they've got that kind of discipline. But then at the same time, it's, you're sitting next to someone who's falling asleep in a classroom, right? And in the military, it would be your job to hit that person and wake them up. And, we joke about civilian cultural competency, telling students, like, don't touch anyone, like, right? Or if faculty think that you're a veteran, like, oh, that person should be a leader, like, obviously, so where leadership in the military is very different than leadership in the civilian world, right? Someone tells you to do something, you do it. It's an order, right? Whereas here, right, you have a lot more choice. I think that's one of the biggest transitional issues for student veterans, is that, like, all of a sudden all of the choices.
And certainly you guys also have like a discernment in choices too, like that discipline side from the military like brings in a little bit of discernment to choose, like, is this really gonna benefit, like getting up at 8 a.m. for your classes, like that kind of discipline being involved versus like a civilian student possibly might struggle or struggle more with getting up at that early time just in order to go to class. How is it with your with other people in the military? Did you see them also trying to get back into college after they got out, or?
So I think it depends too. I went into college to finish my undergrad before the post 9/11 GI Bill. Now the post 9/11 GI Bill, which is legislatively passed in 2008 and implemented in 2009, was the most generous GI Bill since the original, which happened after World War II. For the post 9/11 GI Bill, most of our students use, it covers tuition for most at 100%, and it gives them a living stipend, right, while they're in school, which makes it possible to go back to school. Before that GI Bill was, and it's still around, but Montgomery GI Bill, Chapter 30, and I used that in my undergrad. So there weren't a lot of veterans where I was, because that wasn't a great GI Bill. It's a monthly stipend, and if you don't have the funds, right, we're talking about, on average, the national average of a veteran going back to college right now is 33. Right, so you're more likely to have children, you're more likely to be married, you're more likely to be independent, right, and working full or part-time while you're enrolled. So that makes it challenging if you don't have that additional income, right, or support to pay for school. I was really lucky. My father let me move back in with him for no rent for me to go back to college. And if he hadn't done that, I wouldn't have been able to do it, right? Because that GI Bill wasn't that great. So when the post 9/11 GI Bill passes and gets implemented, the VA reported an increase of 43% in attendance, right? People using it. Now, was it because it was so generous? In large part, I think so. It's also, if you think 2008, the economy crashed and people were looking for retraining. So I think people took advantage, like, utilized the GFL fortunately to go back to school, to get retrained, to figure out what to do next. But sometimes with veterans too, they're here for a new career, right? Not necessarily for a traditional college experience. And that's another like, transitional issue, right? Because a lot of students here at 18 are here to be on their own, be independent, where these folks already have had that.
I'm taking all in the importance of investment when a veteran comes out to help them transition. And for example, you having the support of your parents was what made the deal for you to continue in your undergraduate education. I know that you guys are here to serve the veterans. When they come in, what is the first, what is the normal concerns they have when they come into this office and they're seeking for help?
I mean, I would say they usually find us because they need some type of assistance getting their benefits activated, getting their tuition, figure out how to get these benefits certified. And everything at the VA directs them to the school, campus veterans office. So this is where they, show up at our doorstep. And we do have a very robust and big work study program, which is something that they can participate in if they're using their benefits. So once they come, they get more information, they get certified, they get connected with our different staff members that, work with different issues. And they find out that they can participate and do work study, and we have events, and we try to reach out to them. We do a lot of outreach. We email, we post through our office Canvas page about our services, but that doesn't usually bring them in. It'll bring a couple here and there to attend our events, but for the most part, we see them with questions like, "I'd like to enroll. I've been, I'm being discharged. What steps do I need to take? Is my application process different than the traditional student? How can I get credits for my military experience?" That type of thing, like benefits, credits. Can I get an application fee waiver? So any kind of questions where they're trying to see where their veteran status will assist them in any way. They usually come to us, and then they see what other services we provide, and sometimes we get involvement from them, and they continue to work with us, going forward during their college experience.
Good.
Interesting. And in these years, because you have the experience of being ex-soldier and now you became a veteran and you had the support system, but you probably know some of those that don't have that support system. How hard is for a veteran that doesn't have a good support system to transition to higher education?
I mean, I will say it's gotten easier, like so with the generosity of the GI Bill, but even that's difficult. I don't, because you need more than just the support financially to be here. But if you're here, during COVID was a good example. We had students who are single parents, and their kids were remote. So our population, the veteran population, and I should say military affiliated population, because we don't just have student veterans, we have student service members, and we have their family members that we have to work with. So we say military affiliated, or people say connected. Um, but this particular person, I'm thinking single parent, veteran, and when COVID happens, our population dropped more than the traditional college age population, and it's because of having all those additional responsibilities outside of the institution, outside of home. And I think that is, what's challenging if you don't have that support structure, because she was trying to finish her degree, but kids are home also doing commuting or classes online because the school's being closed. Once again with work, right? I can't go this semester because I don't have enough money. I'll work another semester, and then come back. It's like the breaking of not consistently it's persistence that matters, not necessarily retention for the population. So maybe they're going to take a semester off. Maybe they're deployed. So for our current students, especially for a few years in a row, we had a lot of them getting activated before COVID because of natural disasters, right? I think 2 in a row, and then just natural deployments. So if you don't have that something foundation, you could say, right? So it doesn't have to be, I guess, family, but friendship, a community, someone who's going to help you, then it's really challenging to do this on your own because higher education is challenging, right? The additional responsibilities I think our students have outside of here, because here our average age of a veteran is 31. The average age of a student who's in the service currently is 27, but even the dependent population is 25, right? So spouses and dependent children, if they don't have each other to lean on, right, then that's going to make their ability to succeed in higher ed or, really integrate into the community. Because again, if we talk about working full and part-time while you're here, or like you can't take advantage of any of the extracurricular activities that are really important to higher education. Like we often talk about like career, like internships. How are you taking an underpaid internship, right, at a company when you're supporting yourself or a family? And then when you do graduate, you're disadvantaged to the traditional 22-year-old who could do that because their parents were probably helping them.
I like what you're saying because also in the military, if you were married, you were considered having housing.
Mhm.
So there was like there was a budget that considered your status. Hopefully, in the future, they can emulate something like that because, like you're saying, we have to consider, the toll and the priority that a family is for us, especially when you have dependents. They depend on you. They depend that you go out there and you come with the necessary resources, not only for your own well-being and education, but you're also trying to raise a child that needs to be educated as well.
Yeah.
So it's equally challenging. I don't know if your own well-being and education, but you're also trying to raise a child that needs to be educated as well.
Yeah.
So it's equally challenging. I don't know if Autumn has a good question for you guys.
Yeah,
I'll
so,
pass it to her.
and when you were speaking, I just put an image in my mind, and I was like, I have to ask you about, but, so when 9/11 was happening, so your job was the carpentry, and then when they approached you and were like, you have to make caskets now, I can imagine like that shift and like what went through your mind, like to see the world begin to change, and you're like you were the one who was like in the forefront of it, and like protecting us at home, but like, what was that like to be in the middle of it?
Well, I say fortunately never had to make caskets. It was more of like the initial, and that is a shocking like thing to be told, right? Because he was just like, I think he was just trying to kind of make us understand the situation we were in. And I didn't go to Iraq until 2003, so it was a little bit more time before I left. I one thing that I think service does, and I did, like I said, build things or repair roads, and it's hard to explain those things when you get back, but service in general, any type of service, connects you with people, and that you wouldn't maybe normally be connected with, right? And so there is that bond, and a respect that I think we're sorely lacking in general sometimes with people if we disagree with them, or I can have very big disagreements with people I serve with who when I still connect with them, but at the end of the day we still very much respect each other, love each other, wish each other well, and I think the idea of serving each other is something that like a positive, or I'll get a positive that came out of the longest period of sustained warfare in American history is, it's a unique experience that I think most people don't get to have. I think people go into social work or healthcare do because they're in service to others. But a lot of different fields, right? I think we've lost that that idea, that concept that we owe each other something, that we're, and I think that's something incredibly valuable. I don't know necessarily, I wouldn't say military's for everyone, absolutely not, but service in some component, right? So I think that was the biggest, like, a positive change I think that's come in the last 25 years, 24 years.
Wow, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
We were told your job is infantry now. Everyone is infantry. But it's funny. It's funny because I was a combat engineer. It's like what could be worse than infantry? Combat engineer, you gotta you know be with deactivated mines and all this stuff. I was like, well, I guess this is good news, right?
He walked out. He was. That's the way.
So kind of laugh on that aspect. I don't know, Kevin. You have a question?
Yeah. For the first veteran student to come in, how is that experience for them when they first come into the college? Like, is it I guess is it like am I waiting outside like a wet dog, like knocking on the door, or am I being like presented like with cookies on the plate?
Mm.
I think it depends on your location. And I think it depends on a lot of different factors. But I will say that when Ursula started working with student veterans, and even when I came back, the majority of us were combat veterans using a GI Bill.
Mhm.
So now we are far removed from all of that. So I would say our population now, you could have a 40, early 40s, late 30-year-old student who is a combat vet. They served 20 years, retired, and now this is a new phase of their life. Or you could have a 22-year-old, right, who spent a few years and that's out. So our population, it's not a monolith, right? So the experience of that retiree possibly is going to be very different from the 22-year-old. Last year we had an 81-year-old student, right, and a 17-year-old dependent. So it's so different in how they approach the institution, right? Like if they're younger, they're looking for more traditional experience. It makes sense. But if they're older, what level of engagement do they want to necessarily have, or can they have? So, we try to, we're going to create a welcoming environment. And our job actually is to create a culture of support for them on the campus. Because, to Ursula's point, we might not see all of them come through our doors or engage us in the way that some students do. And so we want to make sure the campus is as welcoming as possible.
And sometimes they come to us in like a crisis situation, or like in a situation where they've run into an issue with a professor, or another office on campus, financial aid or student accounts, where there's an issue with their term bill, and it's kind of like a negative. It has, they come to us looking for assistance because they're having like a negative experience with someone else on campus.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not always positive. It's always, but then they come to us and they see that we do the best that we can. We don't necessarily have all the answers to their problems, but we can connect them with other offices and try to expedite whatever, issue or problem that they're having. So they do appreciate, they end up appreciating, what we do, although sometimes they might come to us like a little bit upset and, in a crisis situation, even, it could be like a financial, crisis, something about their benefits are being delayed, they can't pay their rent, or they, got into a car accident, or there's a family, health emergency. So other offices will hear right away, oh, this is a military affiliated student, go to the veterans office. So then they show up at our doorstep, like, oh, help, So we try to do our best to help them out and connect them with whatever resources. And we have we're very lucky here at Rutgers to have a lot of resources. Not all campuses and schools, throughout the country are as lucky as our school. So we don't take that for granted, and we make sure that they see that and they don't take that for granted, because some of our students some of our staff were here before this program was started and was as supported and robust as it is today. And so, we make sure that they know that, they don't take things for granted. But sometimes they do take things for granted, and you never know. Like, you have a younger student, they have no idea what the combat veterans went through, So it's a very different experience. We deal with so many different types of students, and I wanted to mention about the housing situation is a lot of our students are out-of-state students, because the benefits that they can use are, it puts them at the in-state tuition rate. So if they're using the post 9/11 GI Bill for as a dependent, they come here out of state. And Rutgers is a really great school, so it's one of the top choices for a lot of students, and we end up getting a lot of out-of-state students. Even our service members, they end up being stationed here in New Jersey at the end of their career, and they end up coming here. So a lot of times they're here and they don't have that support system because they're family is all over the country. So that's also a challenge because they come here, they reach out to us because they need that new support system. They're looking for housing, they're looking for some kind of support because they don't have that support here necessarily in New Jersey. We do have a lot of in-state students, but we do have a good amount of out-of-state students because of the benefits allow for that, to happen. So we also deal with that, and we try to make it like a good environment for them to, come here and see that there's others that have been through a similar experience and make their like readjustment a little bit more comfortable.
You guys are a sanctuary, like
Yeah.
nice little oasis here to keep the veterans, even the culture, like keep
Mhm.
that culture around, show them like, hey, it's not gone, like it's in your blood now, like this
Well,
community guy.
That's kind of an interesting point too, because you also have a lot of students who, when I got out, I wanted nothing to do with, right, like the military or other veterans. I was good, it was done, that's it. And so there are students here. We don't try to be overly
Mhm.
military either. Like there's a space for it, and I think it's the bond culture part that like does connect our students, but because our experiences are vast, because we're coming from so different, right? Like I served in a combat engineer unit, right? When women were in combat, I'm just doing that. So, right, because I was in Iraq but I was a support role in a combat. So I served with combat engineers. We're in the same platoon I was in.
No wonder you're so cool.
Yeah, I'll give you that $20 later. So like my experiences though could be vastly different, right, from your experiences, even if we were in Iraq at the same time, right? So I think you do find those connections and that bond, and it's a little easy too. Again, when you know your place, your rank, all that stuff, and you get here. One of the things we try to be is a first stop shop. So we don't want to be a one-stop shop. And I think a lot of places do try to do that for veterans. And I think that's a disservice because it's convenient, of course, right? People love convenience. It's very transactional in a way. And since the military, yes, did all those things where it's here, go here for this, go here for this, go here for this, that's it. And it's very confusing to be here and be like, go see financial aid. Oh, no, go see student accounting. Go to this one. Like, and that can be frustrating. And so Ursula's point, we do see students coming at the frustrated point, right? Because it's vastly different from what they experienced. But that's what the world is. That's even how the VA operates, right? And so we want to be a first stop shop that they come here first so we can help them avoid all of those things. But then we want them to engage on campus because they're different people and we can't be everything, that they need. And I think recognizing that and being able to kind of stay in your lane, so to speak, of we're very good at knowing benefits, at helping them access those benefits, learn about different benefits or connecting them with support. But, I'm not an academic advisor and I don't want to advise them. I want them to go to an academic advisor in their unit, in their department, or their school. So I think that's a better model because I think ultimately I don't want them just to be successful here. We want them to be successful when they leave here.
Yeah. I like that you guys are the doorstep of integration for a veteran. And how and it's true. A lot of the things that come here, they need to process it somewhere else. And you're just the guide saying, hey, these are the steps you have to take, but we can't do it for you. You're gonna have to do this yourself. It's part of the responsibility of being an adult.
Right.
So do it yourself. But I do see that the veteran community trusts this place a lot because Rutgers University has an alarming amount of veterans. That means that something is being done well. Can you walk us through what you guys believe is the best things you offer besides the experience that you give the veterans? Just to give you an example, the first time I came here and I met Ursula, and unannounced, I just came seeing a patient, and I stopped by, and all these young men at the bottom talking friendliness. Then Ursula comes downstairs, friendly. We chatted. We had our personal podcast. We were just chatting, and I do think you guys do sell an experience besides the services. Can you walk us through what you believe makes this place successful?
I would say, validation of that experience, right? So all students, no matter what type of student you are, if your experiences are validated, who you are is validated, you are ultimately more successful. And that's what all the research says. Um, and so I've been here, I started before I got here, my doctorate in education, and it focused on military cultural competency. And so what I think we provide to students, because what most military affiliate students, most student veterans say, and all the research that's been conducted since there was this huge wave of them in higher education, is that they don't feel understood by other students, by faculty or staff, that they think that their military service isn't appreciated or understood, and that's isolating, right, on a campus. So I think the best thing we do is to create a space to be like, "Yeah, I appreciate what you did. Your experiences are valid. This transition's hard. We get it, right? We know that you're an adult coming to education, and I think that that can be a universal thing for veterans, right? Regardless if you're the 40-something-year-old veteran or the 22-year-old veteran, like just a validation of the experience, what you did, right? Only 1.7% of the population has served in the military since 9/11. We're a very, very small population, right? And because it's so small, I think where do people get their understanding of the military, right? It's from the media, and the media tends to over sensationalize our experiences and making them either very extreme in one direction, right? Like I always say, like, we're really violent, we're going to commit a violent act, to we're running into burning buildings to save puppies on a daily basis. Right.
Which one are you?
Very good.
Obviously,
We're really right. Most of us are just in the middle, exactly. And I think those two things create a situation where, right, veterans are treated different because of like unconscious bias, and it makes it so that they don't want to identify themselves because of that, possibly. Like, well, if I tell them I'm a vet, they're going to think I'm violent or I'm crazy or
I have PTSD.
right, yeah, or I'm super, a superhero,
Yeah.
right? And so that's a lot of pressure. So I think again, validating, like, thank you for your service. We appreciate your service. These are the things you're an adult responsible for. Let's so treating them like, no, you're a person, right? So I would go back to like that type of approach, I think.
So my experience is a little bit different because I'm a civilian working with military students or military affiliated populations. And I think if I was working with a different population, which I have in the past, I think what counts is like how you treat someone, listening, being an active listener, just listening to people. Sometimes they just need someone to talk to and let all their frustrations out. They might not be here. You might not be able to give them an answer or some type of, physical product. They just might be here to come in and talk to you and have someone that's there to listen and support, offer that ear of support. And just having, I think, good like customer service skills. We do that a lot. Like all our staff is very polite. Like when someone asks a question, I hear all the time, like, oh wow, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Like I think people, students, like us humans in general, don't get that nowadays. Everything is social media and very impersonal, and there's no like it's an automatic response. You get some kind of automated response. There's no human interaction. There's no human contact. I think we provide that to whoever we interact with. We're good about giving them like a response, like a human response, even if it's in the form of an email, providing them with, good afternoon, so and so, instead of like a automatic message, being like giving them that personal touch, being polite, even though they're coming at us with a lot of anger and, they have whatever they're going through, we listen to them, we hear their story, we try to provide them with the best services and just being polite. And even though sometimes it's hard to be polite when someone is coming at you and saying all kinds of things and, but that calms them down. If you have that calm, if you don't get upset and agitated and come back at them with the same agitation they're coming at, with you, then that can give them it can calm them down. It can give them like a sense of like, oh wow, they're here to hear what I'm going through, to hear my story. And sometimes that just calms somebody down and makes them a little bit more relaxed, puts them like in the present moment instead of like, what they're dealing with, something that is out of their control. That's part of like, working in mental health and, bringing someone down into the present and dealing with like, the mindfulness instead of just, it's hard to like sometimes not get wrapped up with someone's, problems and crisis and issues that they're going through, but that, that might be out of their control. It might be something that, we cannot help them solve, but we're here for them. We listen to them, and then it's magic. People let out their frustrations, and they feel a little bit better. And so that's something that we provide. I think just having good customer service and being polite and trying to show them that we care. I think they appreciate that. Right.
Courtesy and dignity is what people always try to look for in places like this. And I like what I'm hearing from you guys because in the military, when they say now, that means yesterday. So when you get out, the expectation is high that people are going to react with that sense of urgency. But then you come into a different set of rules. Then you realize like now could mean whenever that person freely chooses to do so. So there's a big transition in terms of the culture. And I do think that one of the opportunities, and you guys do a great job, but one of the opportunities, I guess, from the DoD has to be what is the real value of somebody that served? For example, you go to school, you go to college, you get a degree, you get accreditation, and you become competent based on that accreditation. You come out of the military, yes, you get benefits, but it's not accreditation. It's nothing that says this is what you're valued because of your service. And this is where I believe a lot of veterans have a hard time when they're told, thank you for your service, and yes, we like the appreciation, but there's a difference between appreciation and value. You want to be valued because you did something that nobody asked you to do. You risked your life. Freedom is not free. We know that really well. It comes with the price of blood, people that fought before us. I visit the Veterans Hospital, and you should see the VA. I'm sorry, the Vietnam veterans, their stories, their experience, and to see how you guys are making people have that dignity that those that fought before us didn't have. It's admirable to me, and I really value what you guys do. And when you guys opened the door for this opportunity, that's exactly what we wanted to expose, like the great deeds that you guys do, the unselfishness, the willing to love those that come frustrated. It's not an easy task. I want to make sure you understand that there's people that come here fearful with PTSD, with different culture and different backgrounds, and Anne and Ursula, Dennis also here. They're trying to make them feel human and back, like they're back home. You know, I want to pass this question to Autumn. I don't know if Autumn, you have any questions for them.
Do you guys have any stories of veteran students once they've graduated? Did they come back and celebrate?
We had one student who we created a pipeline internship that unfortunately didn't make it through COVID, but the very first person who we put into that internship, graduated from here, went and got was an intern there, did a graduate degree at a different institution, but ultimately went back to that place that they had the internship and worked there now. And they're the head of the veteran affinity group at that organization. And so we still do work with them when we show up to there. And when we called the alumni, the veteran alumni, to help participate, because we were trying to, and we're currently doing this, try to raise money for an opportunity fund. And the reason of the opportunity fund is recognizing how diverse the population is, right? So since we are so diverse, everyone's need is very different. So we called him, he's like, oh, absolutely, I'll be there, what do you need? And so he came back to do an event with us just to, help raise awareness and hopefully, money for the opportunity fund. So, it's nice to see them be successful after. And so that's like, it's very rewarding because our goal again is like, we want you to have a great experience in higher education and college, great. But we really want you to be successful long term, right? And so those are I think the student situations that, right?
Yeah. I mean, that reminded me that I work with the social work students here since I'm a field instructor here. I supervise their students when they come. There's a field placement component in the MSW program. So we are a location where they can fulfill that internship requirement. And I supervise usually the students that are like in their bachelor's level, social work, like finishing up their undergrad degree or like the first year of their MSW program. We have had second year MSW students as well that have had like a clinical placement or a policy, like they were on the policy track. So anyway, I supervise those students here, and a lot of times, they're not. Sometimes they do graduate, and we hear their story, but sometimes we have students that are here and they still have like another year, and we help them get another placement, or we follow them, or they stay in touch with us. Because I build a pretty close relationship with these students, working with them throughout the year, meeting with them for supervision, helping them develop their social work skills. Like I'm like a mentoring position with them formally through the School of Social Work, and we end up kind of following them. Even if they're not graduating, we end up following them to their, seeing where they're going to be at their next internship, or after they graduate, they, let me know. Like I know pretty much all the interns that I've had here where they're currently at. So yeah, it's a great and positive, way to close out that, that their experience here at the college level, and to keep that door open and be able to follow them, into their next chapter. Sometimes we don't hear from them, we help students out and we don't hear from them, and that's okay too, but it is truly nice and rewarding to be able to like follow the ones that we help out, and they are very, grateful and thankful for our assistance. So that's definitely something that we appreciate.
Definitely, that's so important too. As like higher education professors and faculty of support, to make sure that the success is not only just in the higher education field, or in the let's say the domain of it, that you're also successful in a whole bunch of other domains. Being that adaptability as well, like teaching how the students have to adapt to this different situation, like not just being the all in one place to go to, but being the place that is the guide that points around and says, go over here, ask some questions, being responsible adult. Because then that generally just ultimately creates the success of that person. And I'm so happy you guys do that for the veterans here and for all the military affiliates that are here. Because that's important, like sometimes like after college, like people will have their degrees, but the degree didn't make them successful. Like they'll still do like sometimes you'll get the degree, but then your job wouldn't be around the degree. So like sometimes higher education for some people would like, why would I even go get a higher education if my degree isn't even going to apply to what I'm going to do long term? So I guess for that situation, if someone has a degree and they don't use it long term, I guess what are the principles of getting a higher education? Like what are those principles that make somebody successful, even if it's not a longer degree? Let's say like in fine art, for example, a lot of people go get a lot of like liberal arts science degrees, fine art science degrees, but they won't find themselves in the gallery space. Like I'm one of those examples, right? Like I can go and find myself in the gallery space yet, at least, but I'm still gonna find myself successful in other areas, which definitely helped out because of higher education, but being the faculty and being those mentor mentees to everybody. How what are those core principles?
I mean, I think higher education, like, it makes you think outside the box, right? Like I have a history master's degree, an undergrad in political science and history, a minor in Jewish studies. That was my undergrad. I mean, my doctorate's in education, but I started my doctorate after I was working in higher ed, so it's related in that. But my degrees before it had nothing to do with what I do. I like to joke I'm really good at like trivia, like but then maybe that's it, or fun facts. Which what really everyone's like, no, it's just a fact. It's not fun. It's just a fact, right? So that's where I'm at with that. But I think that taught me how to do research, right? I'm very good at research because of having a history degree. What I think is important, though, for any student is it's not just the degree you're getting, it's to open your mind to, I think, the uh, possibilities that degree gets you, right? So just because possibilities that degree gets you, right? So just because you major in psychology doesn't mean you're going to end up working in psychology, but it's still got something, right? Maybe how to speak to people, how to interact with folks, right? And so helping students, because what I do think we see sometimes is because the military is the way it is. We have someone come, a veteran who's like, I want to do engineering because I know those jobs pay well. They're safe. They'll always find one. I want to be an engineer. Well, you're not good at physics, so that's probably not an option. But this is the career I want. What do I do to get to that career? Instead of saying, okay, well, there's more than just that. So we do a lot of like partnerships with different industries, organizations, corporations that come in. And if you think of something like, I'm just trying to Prudential, right? They're out of New Jersey. They love hiring veterans. They have a very strong veteran like Infinity Group or ERG Group for their employees. And we talked about like, well, I don't want to be insurance. I don't want to do that. I'm like, they have finance there, right? They have cybersecurity there. They have like looking past what you think you want to do, or maybe, you're getting a degree in this, but you can apply it in all these different ways, like you were just saying, right? So I think getting them to expand their outlook on what options there are. To go back to something you were saying now, one of the challenges I think for military affiliated students who come here, veterans and service members, is the value, right? Of like you were in the military for 5 years, 20 people reported to you, you were in charge of $1 million worth of equipment, their lives, and then you come here and you're a first year student, along with the 18-year-old, right? Who's never held a job, possibly. And that can be demoralizing, right? And the same thing happens, I think, when you graduate for students. And it's not just military affiliated students or veterans, all students. Like, here it is, you got this degree, yet, you do what I did after I finished my undergrad, waitress, right? Because that's the job I had. So I think it's being open to like opportunities and not feeling that just because I got this degree, I can't go and do this. Right? It doesn't mean you're stuck somewhere. As we started this, like, I wouldn't be working with veterans if Urzsula hadn't cold called me, right, to work with veterans. And so here I am, right? So that's
and then I wouldn't be here because we didn't continue our story, but I was home raising my kids, and she ended up going into a full-time position at College of Staten Island. One of the dean or assistant dean moved over to Rutgers and then reached out to her and said, oh, we have this director position opening up here at Rutgers. You should apply. So she applied and she got hired here. And then she was looking, she had an opening for a staff member and encouraged me to apply. And at that point, I was ready to go back to work. My youngest was 3 years, the boys were 3. So I was ready to go back and work a full-time job. And I applied here and I ended up getting the position here. So it's like, it worked both ways. I helped her out, got her into the field. And then when I was ready to go back to full-time work, I was able to continue working with veterans here in this setting. So it's kind of that, which brings me to my point. I wanted to mention the getting something out of higher education is also the networking aspect.
Yes.
Because as you see, for us, she was a college student, being able to network and communicate with others that you can relate to also opens up other doors for you in your life in general, not just in the college setting. Just that human interaction or meeting somebody, we go through this all the time. We meet people, they reach out to us, and then we end up getting something for a student, like an internship or a job placement. They're looking for some kind of connection. So again, it's that interaction, that networking, and with military affiliated students, that it's like a huge component, because it's a lot of times, they're in these leadership roles in these companies and they're looking to hire others. And it's sometimes not just the degree, it's also like you have to know somebody. You have to have that relationship with somebody, because it's so much better when you can hire someone that you trust and that you've worked with. It's not just a random resume you're looking at. So
Exactly.
the networking aspect of college and, getting into an internship and whatever experience, working with others, that's a huge component of being in the college setting, I think.
I agree. The social interaction, so you can have a broader view, not only of the professionals, but also the convictions, how that person operates, how can they integrate in a social setting, how do they lead, how do they complement others, people's leadership. So I think it's very important to like it's like you're making the perfect steak. You want to have the all the proper seasonings so it can come out right. And I like what you were saying about like the undervalue of even a degree sometimes when you get out of a bachelor's, because also today we live in this perception that even an entry level job requires non-entry level experience. So it's true. What is the criteria to meet certain um, meet job descriptions to get certain positions? And this is where I do think people are becoming more entrepreneurs, because how would I fulfill something when the experience I've acquired surpasses that, but yet I'm not qualified for it. With that, I wanted to ask you a question, and I'm a little when I was in the military, and I'm gonna be honest about it. My unit was a lot of people that had misconduct. They were using a lot of Percocets. There was a lot of PTSD going on, but we just didn't have a word for it. And some of them didn't get honorably discharged. They got dishonorable, bad conduct. And when you get out with not with honorable, you don't get a lot of the privileges you get with honorable discharge. How many of those come here for assistance, and what could be done for them? Because it's hard to see, like, you're also 18, 19, 20. What do you really know about life at that age? You know, but how is the life for them here, and how do you guys also try to outsource to help them?
So I would say I think you see it less now than you did,
Thank God.
right? 5, 10 years ago. But again, because most of the veterans coming out now might not even be combat veterans, so some of the exposures aren't the same. But bad papers, right? Having bad papers, because that limits your ability to access, right? All the VA care. Now the VA has changed a lot in response to that. I believe I can't think how long ago it happened, but they started saying, okay, well, even if you had a discharge under general, right, or even dishonorable conditions, you could still maybe access healthcare, right? I do think, like we've connected with lawyers for students to help them address bad papers before. You know, that's a process, and it's a process outside of here, and it's complicated.
It takes years.
Right, it
too.
can, yeah, yeah. And then they're always welcome here to use the facility and the services, and for us to get them support, but they might not, be able to use their GI Bill, right? So I don't know how many we see often because it's the GI Bill, right, that really does give a lot of that access to higher education, and you have to have good papers, right, to get it. But we've provided like insight and pointing into the right direction. But I don't want to talk to something I don't have as much experience at, right? So I'm aware of it, I've seen it, and I've seen people get through it to access their benefits again. But it's a very isolating thing. I mean, well, a public service announcement: get a veteran service officer. Find a veteran service officer. They're usually in towns, have their own, counties have their own, the state has their own. Veteran community organizations, VFWs, American Legions, Disabled Veterans of America, they have them. That's who you should work with, right? That is one of they have a ton of resource. Find a good one, talk to other veterans, and we like to God, yeah, right?
Yeah.
Like, we like to tell people.
I'm glad to hear the statistics are lower, because you're right. During time of war, you see more of this behavior take place. There's a lot of confusion. There's also, in the stage of adolescence into young adult, you're forming the consciousness of your identity. And think about it, and it's so hard to live those years because you're trying to justify who you are and where you're going, and it's you're more open to misconduct. And trust me, the military structures you, discipline,
Yeah.
all these things, but there's always that rebellious spirit in you as a young individual. Not everyone, but I would say a vast minority does. You know that they're dreaming about what their life is going to be. You know, and perhaps you make more mistakes as you get older. You kind of like bend that road.
I definitely. I mean, I went in at 21, but you could see the difference between even when I went in at 21 compared to the 18-year-olds who were in, right? And now they're kind of shaped and you don't really, right? I like to joke that I was probably a mess until I was 29, right? So, and that was after I got out. But I do think too that, you know, this past, again, longest period of sustained warfare in American history. And so for our combat veterans in that group, it was unlike other conflicts because you deployed, you came home, you deployed, you came home, you deployed, you came home. So we were using a much smaller force more frequently, and rushing to adapt, right, to them coming, like even higher education. Like, so we saw a wave of military affiliated students, veterans on campuses after that post 9/11 GI gets passed, but there weren't services on campuses dedicated for them because there were never that many on campus.
That's a good point.
And so after every conflict, there's usually something set up. But in the past, what's happened is that as the population dwindles, right, you don't need the office anymore, and so it goes away. In working in higher ed and with veterans, I've only met one person who was like, I was hired during the Vietnam era, and I still work at the institution, and that was somewhere here, right? But most schools rushed to create something. And where it's housed also says something. I believe like when they created it, College Staten Island, you were hired.
It was under
Yeah.
the wellness center. It was under like wellness and health services.
Mhm.
It was a part-time position. Although most of the certifying official is usually in the registrar's office because that's where they're certifying their benefits, and it goes through the registrar's office because it's connected to their like term bill and benefits and all that. But the office itself where I was at was under wellness. So I think there's that combination of like, academic services versus student services. Where do you put it?
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, that's a very interesting topic because like who funds like
Right.
for example the program? Is it the DoD? Is it the state? Is it federal level?
Well, we're a state institution, and so our office, Rutgers in New Brunswick, our office falls under the University Academic Affairs, and that's because we serve the entire university.
Mhm.
However, the other locations at Rutgers have an office, but they're in different areas on their campuses, respectively. So Newark is under Student Affairs. The Veteran Services in Rutgers Camden is under Enrollment Services, and it depends, right? It's just in a lot of different schools, right? You're going to see it to Ursula's point, like either in the registrar, financial aid, possibly. And those tend to be like, I think, more transactional because, you register for your classes, you get your benefits, and and that works. Whereas when you have a larger population, you'll see the office created, or a separate thing created in a student affairs kind of way.
Yeah.
But it just really always depends on the population at the institution and if there's enough there, right? So when we're really fortunate to have this, to have a house, a separate building, standalone, right? Even compared, we're part of the Big 10, which is Big 18 now, which is the big, right? And it's different on every campus from right east to west coast.
Mm.
All of us have different, looks. All of us have different types of support, right? So it depends on the population, what's around, what type of support is also around for them. How much do they need the institution itself to provide it? How much is community providing?
Mhm.
So, I mean, there's an expression about the VA that when you know one VA, you know one VA, right? Like it's not, every VA is different. Like
Hey.
some are great, a lot. I mean, I'm very for a lot of them great. Some are not great. And it's the same thing, right, with services and what you have access to. Some are great, some aren't great.
Mhm.
It's just there. It's not. I don't think there's a way to take what one school does and replicate it exactly in another location and to find it'll be just as successful. I think a lot of factors go into supporting people and like any group and supporting veterans, and it can't just be institutional. Like we try to create
Right.
the safety net, and this mostly Ursula and her role, not just here but outside here.
Reaching out.
Right, because it's got to be a network outside. Because when you're not a student here and you graduate, you lose a lot of the access you had that you had as a student, right? Like, whether career services, you get access for about a year to some of the additional support they provide, but then you don't, and you're an alumni, and that's a different thing. So having a strong network outside of the institution for support is, I think, critical.
Interesting. Autumn or Devin, I don't know.
I remember on the podcast when we did the podcast with Dennis. Dennis was telling us how a veteran will be in each, at least one veteran will be in each office, so you kind of have like that military connected, military understanding amongst each office, like whether that's I don't know necessarily knows. I'm just gonna like spit out just random offices, financial aid, the registrar, let's say advisors. Like you'll have he'll say like a veteran will be in each one, so then you have someone like contact, a point of connection to it, and it seems like that could be like a overall possible strategy for each different college, just because you have that person who's gone through the experience, they understand what the veteran has gone through. They even if they don't understand, for example, like you haven't gone into the military, but you just kind of like you get the scope of it because of the community that's around. I guess like what are some strategies if some colleges aren't able to house a certain office? What are some strategies that you would recommend? Maybe one of our listeners is an advisor from a college, right? What would you recommend for them to support the veterans if they can't open up that one house?
So just from experience, like we've seen different, like CSI had a different situation that Rutgers has, and we've seen throughout our years different campuses and going to conferences. We've seen religious institutions versus huge state institutions in Texas and California, versus small private institutions. So everyone has a different way of dealing with these types of students. But one thing that can happen if you don't have the resources or you don't necessarily have a central place, I think, like what you were mentioning, having a point of contact in every office. So we don't necessarily have a military affiliated staff member in each office, but we have someone that we work with that could be a civilian. Like we have a dean that we work with in School of Arts and Sciences. We have a dean. We have a point of contact that works with our non-traditional students in SEBS, which is the biological sciences. We have a different point of contact that kind of specifically pays attention to our population. And if we have an issue with one of our students and they need assistance in financial aid, we have a point of contact at that office. So we have not necessarily a military veteran, a staff member, but they work with our students. So they're our point of contact where we can assist them. So that kind of having that environment anybody can do that on any campus.
Yes.
Having like that veteran advisory type of group on any campus. You don't necessarily have to have an office, but you can have like a point person in the registrar's office that can help, with student issues, if it's, certifying, or, someone in housing that can help accommodate our students, when they come in their 30s and they don't want to live in the dorms with 18-year-olds, getting them into graduate student housing. So we don't necessarily need to have a veteran in every office, but we have like a veterans advisory kind of informal, like we have an informal network here, and some campuses have a formal, like I learned from a conference I attended, they have a formal veterans advisory group that meets, in Texas, because Texas is a huge state, and they, so they meet however they meet, and they have a veterans advisory committee throughout all their campuses at one of their universities. But then we also have, Anne can talk about the Big 10 or big whatever it's called now.
The big.
The big.
They get together, and it's it's pretty formal. It's not, I wouldn't say it's informal, but it's like a network through all the Big 10 universities, throughout the country, where they come together with ideas and they meet and they share best practices. So having just a group in whatever sense, we have one in New Jersey here, the JAVPA, where all the members who work with our professionals that work on campus meet every quarter to discuss whatever's going on in the state, policies, and just having like a network of veterans advisory. And Anne can speak a little bit more to that, what the nuts and bolts of that.
like to her point though, yeah, it's not always going to be a veteran, right? Because when I said only 1.7% served, most veterans are over 65 years old, so they're probably not necessarily, they might not be in the workforce anymore, right? So to say like, okay, it has to be a veteran, and also not veterans sometimes don't want to talk to another veteran, right? But what I do think matters is, and I get back to military cultural competency. So what we do here is we go to other departments. We do it in front of students, we do it in front of the departments, faculty, we do it outside the institution, and we provide military cultural competency education sessions to make sure that that point of contact that Ursula was talking about, which for most schools, they have to have one in financial aid and student accounting because that's required by law to be approved, right, for the GI Bill. So they probably already have at least that, the minimum. But to make sure the staff who are interacting, right, with a student who's a student who served or is currently serving has some military cultural competency outside of, again, not like the media, like, well, I read 5 articles about, like, let's just go back to even January, right? New Year's Eve, right? And then that day after, we had 2 suicides, right? Like the one that was in a Tesla, right?
Vegas.
In Vegas and New Orleans. And those were veterans, right? And so if that's what you see, and then the next day someone walks into your office and they're like, I'm a veteran, that might sit with you if you have no other exposure, experience, or understanding of the population. And so for someone who's a civilian, we do it for other groups, is like become culturally competent about the population. So you have a better way that you can engage with them. So you can have that conversation and better serve them, right? And one thing that we always, something that always bothers me, and it happens everywhere, is we'll get a call about a student, like, I have one of your students. I'm like, no, you have one of our students, right? They're not just my student because they're a veteran or a service member. They're ours because they're actually enrolled, right, with you. And they'll see you more than me. So, but that's the opportunity to talk about that cultural competency, right? Is like, don't, because then you're, that, to Ursula's point, like that student, they're sending them to us possibly when really the situation needed to be resolved at the department and it's outside of us. Right. And that's where it's frustrating. It's like a ping pong. Right. And I think the same thing happens with veterans in the civilian world as well. But when it comes to like even I think healthcare, when we talk about if you don't have the exposure, I think military cultural competency, it's very prevalent for social workers. It's prevalent in healthcare. Rutgers does an event at the medical school, joining forces, where they have all of the different PAs, PTs, medical students, nursing students, social work students join them. And they come together and they do a military cultural competency day, right? About that way, a healthcare provider might not have that connection, thinks to ask those questions. I always talk about like women are very rarely seen as veterans and thought to be veterans. And so you go to a civilian doctor and not a VA doctor, they're not going to ask me about my military experience. And that's a lot of my pre-existing conditions, right? So I think military cultural competency, having a point of contact to do a warm handshake, right? To be able, a warm handoff, right, for a student. But that is applicable anywhere. And I think, that's an easy fix, essentially, for if the funding isn't there to have an actual office or the population size isn't there. And then joining groups. Yes, the Big Ten, we meet once a year physically at a different location. This year we'll be in Nebraska. And we meet also virtually. And that started during COVID, where we do get to, we connect. And we constantly talk about what's happening, what we see, might work again in one institution, might not work in another, but we like to bounce ideas off of each other. And in the state, there is a group we meet quarterly. And a lot of states have that as well. Right. So looking for that, because there's strength in numbers. Like if you are at a school or an institution where it's only about 20 veterans that go there and they're not going to have a department, well, and then who's going to listen? You only have 20. Partner up with the institutions around you or other organizations so you can create that support. Right.
I like what you're saying because like Rutgers has over 2,000 veterans?
About 2,000 military affiliated. So does it, yeah.
Yeah, ROTC and everything, correct?
Yeah.
But then I like what you're saying because also you look at Princeton that has like less than 30. So is there really a need and investment on a building there? And the affiliation with out resourcing is so important.
Mhm.
You know, but I like the fact that you guys have created a network of unity to really try to, for example, that Princeton student that doesn't have an affiliation, a veteran affair affiliation building there, they can contact anywhere, anyone, and I like that. I like the fact that we're thinking outside of the box in this term. Autumn, I don't know. I'm pretty sure you have a good question for the ladies.
Do you find that you have to talk about military competency with professors more or like students who are with the veteran students?
Like traditional
Yeah.
non-veteran students. I think it could be both. I mean, statistically, they think, Pew Research did this poll in 2011, so it's quite outdated. But what they found was, it depended on how old you are. The older you are, the more likely you are directly related, as in a parent, sibling, spouse, child, who served in the military. And that makes sense, right? Because World War II, 9% of the population served, everyone was involved, right? So older you are, more likely you're directly related. And to our traditional college students, it is very unlikely, right, that they have a direct relative, a parent, right, who was in the military, or a sibling or anything else. So I think it depends because it just depends on even, you could be older, but if you're only influenced by, again, what you read, like sometimes with PTSD, I find that, like, really the stats aren't that. If you ask a civilian how many service members have PTSD or veterans, a lot of them are over 50%, right? They'll say 50, 70%. Most studies have it under, I think it's like post 9/11 veterans between 15 and 12%, right? It's not everyone, right? But that's the narrative, right? And it's an over sensationalization of the experience. Some of the experience is just transitional issues coming from a very structured to a not structured, right? Like, and that can, and then also coming from a place where you had a purpose, a very clear purpose, a very clear role. You knew exactly where you were in that organization to not having any of that, and that can be jarring, right? So, I don't think I can't say whether it's faculty, staff, or students who it's harder to interact with. I think it just depends on what they know, right? It comes back down to exposure, cultural competency, not necessarily, because if you have a student who just plays a Call of Duty 24/7, and I think that's what our experiences were like when it's much more boring a lot of times, right? Like,
My God.
yeah,
It's formation. There's nothing to do besides cleaning the
repainting
barracks, repainting
something.
something, but there's always something to do. The best thing that happens is uh, when there's really nothing to do, you're dismissed on a Friday early, and you feel like you won the lotto. You feel like I think one of the experience I always remember is like when you get like a butter bar,
Oh.
your lieutenant, right? And they're brand new, and you've been there for a while, and when you're outside, you're supposed to salute. So what we used to do, we used to line up one behind another to salute the new lieutenant. So it was like going like crazy.
Yeah.
You could see how like after a while he's like, "You idiots!" Like literally his face. So that was kind of fun, but yeah, the military even field training at some point gets boring. Like you're like, okay, I feel dirty, I'm smelly. Like what the hell am I? Yeah, I'm tired. What am I doing here?
Mhm.
But I do think it opens the mind so you can become adaptable to a situation, a hostile situation. And even though you're so well trained, because I have to give credit, the military does invest a lot of time. You're never trained to be at war. War, it's its own thing.
Mhm.
You gain its own experience from war itself. The psychological and mental and physical training you get is to become adaptable. But once you get the experience of war, it's its own thing. It's its own training because that's where you develop hyper alertness. You have to be hyper alert about everything and anything that can possibly. But not only for yourself, it's for your battle buddies too, because you depend on them, they depend on you. and you understand that there's a lot of sacrifice that needs to be made, and perhaps a lot of these things develop in somebody uniquely, and yeah, the stats are correct. You know, people that have PTSD, and the issue also is because PTSD can happen a day after, 20 years later.
Mhm.
So, but most veterans will develop some sort of PTSD. It just doesn't happen immediately. It's not like a disease that you contaminated someone else. It doesn't happen. Sometimes something drastic have to happen in your life, and that's when,
I'm a rabbit.
yeah, exactly, your PTSD shows up, and you're like, what the hell's going on? I'm losing control. I feel like I'm disassociated with myself, and it's a very unique experience. But that doesn't mean you're crazy. It's just you're going through emotional disorder because of everything you lived that was so traumatic that you couldn't desensitize through the years, right? And you can talk to someone, because that's another thing. The prevention systems we need to create for people that come back from deployment, even if, believe it or not, even if they don't feel like talking, let's talk about anything. How you feeling today? Because you want them to be okay with expressing their emotions, so later on they're able to, I will say, control and address PTSD in a more, I would say, in a better control environment for themselves, and not be shocked with like anxiety, depression. Like, why? And the why is always what kills you the most. It's that why. Why am I feeling this way? You know. But it's interesting to hear what you were saying also. Like, there's this perception that men are only veteran, and you are an expert in this social environment. Uh, Hopefully, that's, I would say, that mentality is gone, or it's going away. Why why do people, or people believe that women don't respond to danger as men does in, for example, when war comes?
Like, you got this.
Um, I mean, we do. I think it's decreasing definitely. I mean, we've had our like combat veterans that are female, and they're like, they go to the VA, and the VA is like, oh, your husband's a
Well, your
veteran.
husband, yeah.
What's your husband's,
Yeah.
social whatever. It's and they're like offended, like. But I think it's becoming better. I think the VA is getting better at it, to serve the female veteran better, and attend to their different needs, and I think I don't know, the current military, I don't know as far as like the combat, like there are women that serve in combat roles, but they don't necessarily on paper serve in combat roles or.
Because there's no front line anymore,
Right.
right? It's not trench warfare anymore.
Exactly.
But the military, when I was in, again, about 20 years ago, it's like 14% of the military were women. Now it's about between 17 and 18%. We're still a very small portion of the service, but we're the fastest growing veteran population, right? Because more women are serving. But I think that there's an extra challenge for women who serve, because the military, and how we define masculinity, right, is a masculine institution, and it's supposed to be based off of what we define, right, masculinity as. And so for a woman to find, walk the line of femininity and masculinity, that I'm proved to be here, like I'm supposed to be here, I'm capable of being here, but also being feminine. I think sometimes that puts women into a harder position in the service, where they're seen under a microscope more than, like you can have a soup sandwich in your unit that's really good. Like a guy could get like a billion different things in the military, but women tend to be pigeonholed into like very few things, right? And in engineers, there are not as many women. There are very few women in my company. That's when I was the only woman in my platoon for a good chunk of time, with almost 30 men. So I think it's changing. I think Ursula's right.
But I think it goes back to social norms,
Yes,
biology.
exactly.
Just like why are most teachers female, or most caregivers, healthcare worker, why are they more female than male? Why are men in more of the like the doctor roles or the lawyer role? You know what I mean? It's like social norms. It's just, I think, how we've been brought up. It's something that we're trying to break those social norms, but I mean, it is true. In fact, like the male body physically has more upper body strength. So there are some physical things, that there's the testosterone, there's the, I guess it's social norms that, we're trying to break some norms, but some norms are just embedded in us, and it's just how we function as a society, I think, and it's, some things are there and they're meant to be there for a reason, but I think some are not necessarily, like you can have males and females in different positions in different careers, and it's just something that's like, it's like the social norms that are hard to break.
Do we talk about to women, young women, about the opportunity of joining the military? Do we, or, is that more likely a conversation?
Yeah, definitely.
Right, that's going to be happening with men than it is, right? Who's the target of the recruitment? Who's expressing, oh, you should definitely go into this and do
That's a
it?
good point.
And I don't think so. To Ursula's point about social norms, I think it's gradual, right? That and then society steers you in directions as well, right? So I don't. It's not about capability always. It's about just incremental change over time. I mentioned my father enlisted during Vietnam, and he was put on a carrier in the Atlantic. His father was in the Navy at the tail end of World War II. My mother's father was in the Army Air Corps at the tail end of World War II. The two of them, my grandfathers, never went to the European theater, never went to Africa, never went to Japan because they came in at the end, so they just didn't deploy. My father was in the Atlantic during Vietnam. He never went to Indonesia, right? My brother had been in the military for 5 years before I got in. I deployed twice before he even went once, right? And so here I'm a woman in 3 generations, and I'm the only one who had boots on the ground up until my brother he went 2 years after I got back. So was that common? Like if you put our pictures up for, all of us in our military uniforms, who are you going to think's the combat veteran in the group, right? You're always going to look to, there's, 3 generations of men, right? But I went first. So I think it's just that, and you said, wow, right? A second ago, that means because people don't oh, wow, but if it was reversed, right? Then you're like, of course, yeah. I was
expected.
Right. So we're a product, right, of our environment. So it's just incremental, changes.
And you can see the evolution because prior women enlisted were mostly nurses. Back in World War II.
Auxiliary Corps.
Auxiliary Corps, and you can see the transition of the evolution of women. And trust me, women that are engineers, they're building bridges. They're not just no, they're doing the same training as the men are doing, and they are tough. And that's why I like about that aspect is that heroism doesn't have a gender.
Right.
It doesn't. You can be brave and you can be the smallest thing in the group. And just like you could be a coward, be the biggest guy in the group. And you see that a lot in the military. You're like, yeah, this person has guts, and look at his size or look at her size. And what about the female drill sergeants? They're tough.
Yeah,
and
they
and you should see them. They're their hair is done, but they can put out some tears in your eyes, and it's like they're tough. They're really really tough, and they gotta sing cadences, right? They gotta march. They gotta make sure that I don't think they're intimidating at the beginning, but they teach you how to be respectful, even if you see them as the common enemy, because that's exactly the job of a drill sergeant is to be the common enemy for 300 people, so it's challenging, but I do like the progression of female in the military. We just interviewed one of them that's on the ROTC program, and she was talking about how she embraces herself being in the military, and she doesn't see a gender, she just sees a soldier. And that's exactly what we are. At the end of the day, we all are a number in the military, unfortunately. What was the hardest thing for you to transition out?
Because I had just gotten back from a deployment, and then 2 months later, I was 3 months later getting out of the military. The adrenaline of being deployed, and which you don't notice. But then, I joke like I'm petrified of heights. So what did I immediately do? Like I started rock climbing. I got a motorcycle after taking a course for a weekend, and I bought a Harley. Like not even like a sport bike. Like I bought a Harley after riding a motorcycle for 3 days and getting a license. And it was like engaging in things that were high risk because of the feeling, because you're at a constant adrenaline high that you even notice because you're right. If you're deployed, it's a constant high, and then things aren't meeting that anymore. So I think the hard transition for me was kind of like coming out of that gradually over time, or like looking at my actions and behavior, and because some things are not healthy to get, to get that feeling, and some things are perfectly healthy to get that feeling. But that was probably for me that was one of the biggest transitions, and then I think overall, like I went from being on the number side, like not having, the emotionally not going in either direction too much, to, now I have twins as well. Actually, I was like Ursula's twin boys, and
Right.
when I had twins, we
She laughed at me
I
because I had 2 kids, and then I was trying to have a third, and lo and behold, I'm going from 2 to 4. So
Yeah.
she thought that was fun.
I did. I thought it was funny.
And
Yeah.
then when she decided,
I had
and then
kids.
when she
Yeah.
had twins, I got her back, and I said, "Well, go for it, comes around."
Yeah, like karma.
Yeah.
So
Their stories.
yeah, and we both have 2 fraternal boys. So my sons, though, my anxiety, I have PTSD, and my anxiety about safety, right, can't be their anxiety. So how do you make sure, like, so I've been in the military for almost 20 years, but now I'm like, my sons are 9, they want to go up the street, that's perfectly normal, except I'm like, I can't see them and what's happening. And so do I stop them from doing that because it gives me anxiety, or do I let them develop naturally, like, and start to, so I think to your point about when things come out, and different triggers and everything else. And now I cry at the drop of a hat easily. Like it'd be a USAA commercial. Those things are sentimental. Like those are really, they're a lot, right? So, but I do tear up a lot. So, I think it can come out at different times, and I think it can be a factor of environment, and everything else. So, it's still transitionally hard. I'm definitely not high risk now, like in comparison, right?
Yes.
Don't have a motorcycle anymore. Got rid of it years ago. My sons don't even know I had a license, and they do well. And
It's like they could come back and say, "Well, mom had a heart."
there are no pictures. It's destroyed. Yes, everything.
Evidence destroyed. For you, Ursula, like transitioning from foster care and all these different social environments that you worked in, where do you see the difference with when you work with veterans?
I think for me, working with those other populations was probably more difficult, just because you're seeing so much like trauma, like right there and then happening. Whereas with the military affiliated student, that trauma isn't necessarily happening to them right now. They're not living it. But just being able to like relate to them, and having to like what you were mentioning about the female veterans, where they have to like sometimes they are better and more committed because they have to prove themselves. They have to work harder at that. They have to. Whereas if you have a man that's tall, big, strong, he has less to prove because he already has, he has
Perception.
he has that advantage, right? The perception. So for me, working as a civilian, working with military affiliated students is like that imposter syndrome, dealing with that, am I good enough I'm not one of the veterans, because we do have staff that are veterans, and I'm not, my connection is, my father was in the military in Poland because he had to serve, in the army when it was part of their service, whatever. And then my father-in-law was in the Vietnam era, in the Marine Corps, and he joined as well. He was an immigrant, and he came to serve the country to get his citizenship or whatever, legal status
Yeah.
here in the U.S. He came from the Central America. So anyway, working with these students is almost like I have to prove myself, and sometimes it's or even with my coworkers, am I good enough? Am I here? Do I fulfill that same kind of like duty and honor that they did? Can I serve others as they served in the country, but I'm serving them in a different capacity. So for me, I guess that's more of like just like a personal struggle, but it's not necessarily like the physical struggle and seeing that that struggle that they're going through, someone being born to, a drug addicted mother and being removed from her care and dealing with the foster care system. That's like more of like an immediate physical need that they're dealing with. So it's different, dealing with those students and trying to get their approval, I guess, and their buy-in, building that trusting relationship. You have to have that buy-in and have someone, put their trust in you. So for me, I guess it's more of that struggle is more like professionally than physically.
I like how you are very sincere about, sometimes we have imposter syndrome because we don't have a sense of belonging, because we believe, like, we can think that because we weren't there, we're not good enough, and it's normal. And it's funny because I had Dr. Tia and Cherry touch base on imposter syndrome and how she fell into the statistic of being a single mom, and that cultivated this mindset that she didn't want to be a statistic. And I'm very happy that you were able to be brave enough to say, like, well, yeah, I might not be that, but I have all these skill sets that make me competent to help veterans. So really value that. We're going to do one more round of questions, and I don't know who wants to fight this one.
I remember with IHTS episode, we're talking about imposter syndrome. And with imposter syndrome, it's like doing is you're doing. You're not an imposter if you're doing it already. So just know you're not an imposter. You're helping them out. You're doing such a great thing. You're helping the community at large. Especially like trauma's trauma. It's like, how do you deal with the stress of trauma? Dealing with the stress of trauma, it goes in so many avenues. We talk about like coping mechanisms, like how do you cope in different ways. Like higher education is also another like great way to cope with trauma because you're focused on another avenue, like focused on an aim that's above rather than on a target that was behind. Or not target's behind, but the aim that's above in that sense. Also, I'm going to pass down the autumn for a question, then we'll go back around.
So my final question would be, so for viewers listening, why would you guys promote Rutgers for veterans who are looking to come back to school?
And sound humble doing it. I mean, no. No. And I'm not saying I guess I'm an employee. I mean, that helps, right? We care about what we do. To Ursula's point, everyone is invested in what we're doing. That it's very corny, but I would say what we do is as personal as it is professional, and we want to help students not just be successful here, but again in the long run, and help them figure out what that means for them, right? Because this is a journey and a transition, and we want to help them along the way. And I do think that Rutgers offers so many different programs here, so many different degree opportunities. We're highly ranked. A lot of our programs here are highly ranked. It is a big campus, but veterans. So if that's over intimidating, we do have a little. We're the last campus building in New Brunswick on this particular street, and I do think we are able to provide that, yes, big university, but also the more intimate, smaller, more personal programming, and that we view the military population as one vet, one vet. Everyone's different. Their experiences are different. So we don't do huge programs expecting, this will do it for everyone, right? That's why we try to do more intimate, smaller programming, more personal, right, interactions. And that's why I think, we're the place for military affiliate students.
I think, personally me, and I know my colleagues here, we're not in the business for recruiting. I mean, to a certain extent, we have to get our admissions numbers. That's not our department. We're not admissions. We're not recruiting. We when people come to us with questions like, oh, where should I go? Yeah, I want to apply. I can't apply. The next term doesn't start until January. So we're honest with them. We're honest with them. Maybe you need to go to the community college and then you can transfer. We give them all their options. Oh, I'm looking for a fully online program. Well, you know what? Maryland Global World Campus has probably the best option for you because you're, currently, deployed somewhere and you can't, it's not feasible for you to take this program here because we have a limited number of fully online programs, whereas another school might, fit their needs better. So we're not in the business of recruiting. We're here to give them our most professional, honest, answer and information. And, they'll come to us because, we have a good program. I have no doubt, but I think we are very honest and professional and just we have their best interest in
Yes.
mind. Even if, people that come to us that we don't know, they might not even be an enrolled student. They're coming to us with questions and we give them their best, options as professionals.
Mhm.
So that's, I think, why Rutgers is a good choice.
Good answer.
I don't know.
No, good answer.
I like it. They're not recruiters, but I'm bought in. I'm about to going back to school.
Gotta come back for masters.
No, I think I'm done. 13 years.
Yeah. No, I get it.
I guess one of my questions would be, in the military, there's a lot of jobs. Some jobs are transferable to the civilian world,
Mhm.
and some jobs you just gotta find that principle that's transferable into the world.
Mm-hmm.
For a young adolescent that maybe wants to hop into a military career and then college career. So let's say they don't really have the financial support to go into college, but they want to go to the military to get
For that opportunity.
Yeah, for that opportunity. What would you guys suggest for them to look into a transferable job into civilian world right afterwards?
So, and I'm not a recruiter for the military either. I would say that, and you're right. There's over 800 jobs in the military, and they usually fall into three categories. They're combat, right? Infantry is a combat engineer, right? And I was just an engineer because combat engineers weren't open to women at the time, but so that would make me a support job, and then a combat support job, and then just support. So male, finance, cooks, right? So yeah, maybe the support jobs have more transferable like jobs, but I wouldn't say someone joins the military for that purpose, right? Although higher education or access in the GI Bill are overwhelmingly what people join. Like when surveyed, most service members will tell you they join for that access, either for themselves or their family because of the transferability. So I wouldn't say like, hey, do that. Like I was a carpenter. I don't do anything carpentry. Right? Like I'm going to work on my fence next week. Yeah, build stuff. But for me, right? Because I like doing it.
Yeah.
But it's a skill that I enjoy doing, right? And so that I do it like, spice rack maybe I can make. But that wasn't exactly transferable, but it's on my CV because there are other skills that you get no matter what you do in the service. Like someone who's in the infantry, that might not seem like there is a transferable, but leadership, their management, they're still responsible for other people. They're still responsible for mission completion. They still mentor. They're still over equipment. That could be a lot of money, right? Exposure to different countries. There's a bunch of different things, and then also, you said everyone in the military is infantry technically, right? Or that is your primary.
That's your
in addition to your job. But you end up also, my path, and it's not unique. I might have been trained as a carpentry masonry specialist in the Army, but like I said, I did training NCO and personnel clerk, which is like human resource stuff. Helped with awards, so writing a little bit there, right? And navigating the different support services to help the other service members in my company. So you do get exposed in additional responsibilities. So that, yeah, I wouldn't say don't do this, do this. Although I do have a joke that I should join the Air Force, but I think they do. I have an uncle who was in, and he was like, when he knew I was joining, he was like, Told you to join the Air Force, join the Air Force, join the Air Force. He's
My
right.
sister joined it. She got luxury.
Say, right, yeah. But that's a joke. All of the branches like to tease each other about, certain things. And I won't do that here, but, off camera we can joke about that. But I would say, what interests you? I became a carpentry masonry specialist because it had the biggest bonus at the time. That was it, right? Which is really small after 9/11 bonuses got huge. This was like nothing, but
$40,000.
mine was like 10, 5 or
Yeah.
10,000. It's still
In Iraq, they
Yeah.
offer you ridiculous 40,000 non-tax.
right, just to keep you right. So, just pick something you want to do. It doesn't have to be because there's this idea that like you do the same thing throughout your life, right? But I think every path gets you to where you think Again, I was a history major, going to be in the archives until she called me.
Yeah.
So you never know where you're going to end up.
I like that.
Yeah, great job with that too. Great connection place.
I would say we just actually had a student that we met with. She came to us. Actually, her dad reached out to our assistant director and was like, my friend's daughter is thinking of joining the service. Please meet with her. I guess trying to change her mind or something. Like give her some information. So we met with her. She's like 19 years old. She went to college. She was a sophomore. She wants the military lifestyle. She was very young, very sweet and innocent. But she was like, I know this is what I want. I want the structure. I want the orders. I want, But we talked to her and we told her, okay, so it seems like that's it. There's no changing her mind. So at that point, it's like, make sure you read all the documents. Make sure you know what you're signing. She hadn't signed a contract yet. Make sure you take that and you review it with your parents. Make sure because they can tell you whatever they want to tell you, but it's what you sign and it's what's in that fine print that you're going to be responsible for. So we gave her that, and she was very happy to hear that and said thank you for that advice. And then she had questions for us like, where should I go, which route, what's the best position. So it's also I would say look at your strengths. She was from Brazil. She spoke Portuguese. She was multilingual. And she wanted to travel and go to be exposed. She was learning like Japanese or something. So Brian told her about using your language skills, and something in linguistics or translation, things like that. So she was like, oh, that's a good point, and he told her a little bit about, what those types of positions are exposed to. So I would say, your interest and also your strengths. What's your strength? If you have good leadership or math skills, go down that route, because that's something that'll help you out, when you transition out of the military. It's always kind of like when you guys went to college, what do you want to do for your major? It's like what your interest is, what your passion is, and what your strengths are,
right?
And what you enjoy doing, because in the end, you're going to end up somewhere in a job that might not be related to your degree or your major, but it's where your passion is, where what you want to do with your life, what gives you a meaning and purpose in life.
Mm-hmm.
So
it's funny. You remember in basic training, like drill sergeants, like, we didn't screw you up. We are recruited. Yeah, so the drill sergeants perhaps are like the most sincere people you meet.
Right, they have to go through a lot of different training. Right, yes, because they have to be able to kind of, like you said, break you down to build you back up into a certain way. But yeah, I mean, and I don't want to say everyone has a job to do. Recruiters have a job to do, right? That's their job.
That's their job. They're
going to highlight the big things.
Yeah, exactly. Oh yeah, you're going to be at a team.
Do you ever see the movie? It's Private Benjamin. It's Goldie Hawn. It's like an 80s movie. I love that movie. But she's like, where's the yacht? Like, right? Like, and she gets recruited that there's all these pictures.
Yeah.
That's what it's going to be.
It's like, yacht.
Right, yeah.
It's like, what are you talking about?
Right.
My last question, actually 2 questions. There's an ROTC program in Rutgers University. It's a big program here. How are you guys connected? How do you support that program?
So their students and their cadre, so active duty service members are here, who are ours, right? In the sense that we support that population. But we're a university level office, even though we're in New Brunswick and work directly with the population in New Brunswick. And they are just campus in New Brunswick. So Camden, Newark, and RBHS, you can do ROTC through crosstown agreements with other. Like if you were doing Army ROTC from Rutgers Newark, you're going to Seton Hall ROTC, right? You're still a Rutgers Newark student, but that's where you're going to drill out of. So again, there are students, but they're also just specific to New Brunswick here on the campus.
Interesting. My last question is that I know that things evolve. If you have to draw the perfect evolution for what you guys do to serve people, to serve veterans and students in campus, what would that look like?
I would say you have to be adapt. You're talking about adapting. I had a first sergeant, and I still use this today. You don't be flexible, be fluid, because flexible is too rigid, right? We're changing. The population's changing, right? So when Ursula started working with veterans, and I started working with veterans a long time ago, it was all combat veterans. Then it switched into, right, like depending on the state, we have a lot of current service members because there's a National Guard tuition waiver.
And we have a higher number of dependents.
And that's the number that's going to continue to get bigger. There's some Big Ten institutions that half of their population are dependents. And so when you help the dependent, you're helping the veteran. And I think when we have students whose parents who are overseas, stationed overseas, and they're here, right? So I think looking at the evolution is that we don't just say, okay, veterans, and everything's about the veterans. It's about veterans, service members, dependents, and then even within the veteran community, there's the combat veteran and veteran, right? So they all have a place, they all have a home, but they have different experiences and needs. And the evolution is making sure that we're addressing all of them and not just, specific. Because people constantly like, oh, veterans, and like, yes, that is the majority of our population here. But there are these other pieces too, and those matter.
Interesting. And I like the fact that you mentioned service itself is the key to that evolution. Um, and it leaves me with a good note because it seems like both of you have the experience of what the alumni is going to look for veterans when there's a time of war and also when there's peace. And that is so important to have that kind of experience because let's say, God forbid, doesn't happen. There's a war tomorrow. You know what that's going to look like, and you can start being proactive instead of reactive about it. And that knowledge you have, both of you have, it's so important because the veteran is going to be better served. And that's the important thing. That's the message. That's my takeaway. We normally do a little round of takeaways, and that's how we finish. My takeaway is that you have Ursula and Anne that has prepared themselves, and they have seen how the behavior looks like when there's war, when there's peace, and how to serve in those moments. And that's my major takeaway that you guys have become fluid to these situations, and it's all about making. I wouldn't even say it, going beyond the human experience is about understanding that somebody's life is so important to develop, and you help them transition into that. So that's my major takeaway. I don't know about you, Autumn.
My takeaway would be to never lose the heart of service, and you guys did a beautiful job of expressing that. And I think too, like connection does a beautiful job in restoring dignity. So I love that you guys receive everybody and remind everybody of their humanity. And even if they have problems or so many things are going wrong, you look to the heart of that person and you get to the bottom of things. And the heart of service will be in my mind forever now. So thank you.
What about you, Kevin?
My major takeaway was the veterans group is more than just vets. It's about the families. It's about how they impact everything around them, and that there's a backbone to support. Like they're not just alone. Like no one's alone when they get out of the service. Like there is support. Just go out, try to find it. I'm pretty sure somebody will help guide you to it. So for the vets that are out there, and for the family members, like there's support out there. So just search and you shall find.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Anne and Ursula, for educating us, educating the public. Don't forget to subscribe, comment, like. If there's any comments you have with regards of, this particular veteran affair office, I will definitely send them to you.
Absolutely.
And so that way you can help them. And please this is your place to come if you go to Rutgers University, even if you're not a veteran.
Mhm.
They provide an excellent approach to what the alumni experience should be. So thank you, enjoy, and we will see you next time.
New York City.
There's so much more beyond the walls. Let's explore.
I'm a beast. You know I'm a beast. Welcome to the feast. My whole team off the leash. We don't know defeat. Everybody eat. Hey, you know I'm a beast. You know I'm a beast. Welcome to the feast. My whole team off the leash. We don't know defeat. Everybody eat. Hey, you know I'm a beast.
Can I run up the score, run up the board, breaking them all? Ay, ay, walking the door, you know what happened? We step on the floor. Ay, ay, coming from one, you don't want problems, you already know it. Ay, ay.
Maestro style, cosmic call. Transform your mind. It is time to create. Maestro Galleria.